Welcome back, everyone. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay. And I'm going to throw the ball to you, Aaron. And so please go ahead and let's discuss your first question on this first principle of the 9 principles of economics.
Thank you. Well, a lot of the principles there, they seem very intuitive, but it's hard to articulate. And I think the idea that people act, we can all see it, but it's very overlooked in economics today. So I wanted to ask you, what is your take as to why should the concept that people act, why should that be the starting point for trying to answer questions about economics?
When Mises was writing, he was writing in a very different day when this idea that people acted, that they were volitional about what they did, was contested by a lot of people. And this is I think one of the fundamental principles that we really have to recognize is that people make decisions based on the fact that they have goals. They may not necessarily be able to articulate those goals all the time, but pretty much everything that people do is in the pursuit of some end, or it's in the pursuit of some type of goal that they want to achieve, no matter how mundane it happens to be. We don't just get tossed about. We're not ships at sea, sort of at the mercy of the vicissitudes of the market or of society, but rather we take all of the information, all the stuff that's swirling around us, and we use that to inform conscious action.
Mm-hmm. And so specifically to economics, I know that Mises, the definition of economics is just the study of people acting. So in terms of economics, why should that be the foundational, when we're starting to look at economic analysis, we don't look at data, we look at people and how people are going to respond to certain policies?
In large part, theory is going to precede analysis. So we have to have at least some framework by which we interpret the world. Because again, as I tell my students from time to time, beware of facts that appear to speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have a coherent body of theory, then those facts are meaningless. It's not even clear that they're even information. So once you begin with the idea that people are moving towards some kind of goal that they would like to achieve, whatever that goal happens to be, whether it's driving to my office or having a phone conversation or something to that effect, all of the data, all of the information that gets produced by the market or that gets produced by all voluntary actions starts to make sense.
Now, this is Michael speaking, and I've seen that Ludwig von Mises, one of obviously the most influential Austrian economists, refer to this principle that people act as the action axiom.
Right.
Could you enlighten us as to what an axiom is, first off, and why Mises thought the action axiom was so important to the discussion of economics?
An axiom, as I understand it, is a statement that is just self-evidently true. So action is axiomatic in that to deny that people act is to act, in fact. So if you deny that people act, you have to act in order to deny that. So you can't deny that people act without assuming that people act. You're running into
foundation. So this is the foundational principle upon which Austrian economics is really developed.
Right. Yeah, and I would argue all social science should be or can be deduced from or informed by this fact that people act.
It's a very important principle. So Aaron, go ahead.
Okay, and so the second principle that you laid forth in your article is that people act. So that's the first principle, and the second principle is that every action has a cost. And again, it's something that it's intuitive, and it's almost so intuitive that it's hard to analyze unless you've had a background in economics. So no one really ponders the fact that when he or she watches a TV for an hour, that the cost of that action is not being able to exercise or not being able to study. So can you clarify why is it that when you do one thing, you forego doing another thing?
Well, time is scarce, first and foremost. So since you have limited time, you have to choose. You have to choose what you do with that time. So you can, like I said. So the article to which you're referring is something I put on the Mises blog that's based on a handout that I gave to my Econ 100 students. And where a lot of people don't fully grasp or don't fully understand that there really is no such thing as a free lunch. That to do one thing is of necessity to not do another. And often, so for example, when you watch political debates about policy, they'll talk about, say, like the ethanol program, as if this will create however many jobs, or this will create, or this will wean us off of foreign oil, or this will do this, or this will do the other thing. And very, very few people are asking, okay, what are we giving up in order to be weaned off of foreign oil? What are we giving up in order to create these jobs in agriculture? I spent a lot of time writing about the minimum wage, for example, and people don't seem to understand that a higher minimum wage comes at a cost in the form of fewer opportunities, primarily for young, unskilled workers.
This is an extremely important point. I want to jump in here. In some of our recent interviews that we've aired on Radio Free Market with Jeff Tucker and others, we got into the concept of a second step of logic. And what you're bringing out right now, Art, is so critically important because my 16-year-old daughter, who I've been homeschooling for many years, we were having this conversation just this past weekend about a second step of logic. And I said, this is the fundamental reason why there's a lot of difficulty in people understanding economics, because they don't go to that second step of logic. And she said, well, give me an example. And I used exactly what you were just talking about right now, that there is no such thing as a free lunch. I said, people have to understand in the context of that particular statement that somebody always pays. In other words, you have to extend that statement one more time, or in the concept of choice, that you have to therefore give up something. There's the second step of logic. And this is a habit that I see that would serve everyone if we could just inculcate that particular habit of people taking a second step of logic, or asking other people to take things a second step of logic, like you're doing your students.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thomas Sowell refers to economics as the art of thinking past stage one, or asking and then what about any proposition. Economics asks and then what, and then what, and then what, and then what, and then finally, often in the case of government policies, we find out that we get exactly the opposite of what we think that we're trying to do.
So please go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, the third principle, and this my roommate is from Chicago, and he's kind of the person that introduced me to libertarianism. And one of the things that got my mind going was that he kept saying incentives, and that was your third principle, is that people respond to incentives. And the principle just states that incentives motivate people to act. Like when your mom says, I'll give you $5 to clean up your room. Now, you define price in your article as a motivating factor. How do prices come about?
Prices come about through the competing bids and offers of buyers and sellers in a market economy. So when we talk about a market, we're not talking about some supernatural force, or we're not talking about some non-human entity with mind, emotion, and will. We're just talking about a collection of buyers and sellers who, at any point in time, are making a bid or are making an offer. They're either bidding for a good or they're offering a good at some price, and the bargaining process is what ultimately produces the market price.
Yeah, in a practical sense, everybody has day-to-day examples of these incentives in motion. Aaron, when you and I were talking about this earlier, you mentioned remembering when your mother said that she'd give you a few bucks if you clean your room. Now, there's an incentive.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And among the things that I think people take from studying economics carefully is a much more nuanced view of where prices come from. It is absolutely not true that employers can pay whatever they can pay or whatever they choose to pay, and it's absolutely not true that sellers can charge whatever they want to sell, or excuse me, whatever they wish to charge. And the reason for that is because under competition, if you insist on paying someone less than what they can produce, someone else is going to step into the gap and hire that person away from you. In the same way, if you insist on charging, say $500 for a gallon of gas, then you can be reasonably certain that someone else is going to step into the gap and offer an almost perfect substitute for that gallon of gas for a much lower price.
Well, I may be covering the similar ground like that you've just mentioned, but I would like to go over this again from a slightly different angle. You know, we've talked about how prices come about, and in your article you mentioned, you pointed out that prices are powerful incentives when it comes to making people take action. But you wrote something that I think is very important for people to know about prices and how they relate to supply and demand. And you said that what you said was that people will do less of a certain thing as a cost rises, and also
Right.
that people will try to supply more of a certain thing as it becomes more profitable. Or to put it another way, price is determined by the consumer or is imputed backwards. Could you please
Right.
clarify briefly this very important idea?
Yeah. So price ultimately comes from the value that something has in terms of the satisfactions it can deliver for somebody. So if I'm willing to pay $2 for a cup of coffee, that means that I'm willing to forego anything else I could get with $2 to get a cup of coffee. And that action, that transaction, the fact that I might be willing to give up $2 to get a cup of coffee is what's ultimately going to give value to everything that goes into the production of the coffee. It's going to produce the value. That's where the value of the labor of the barista at Starbucks and the value of the coffee beans and the value of everything through the supply chain comes from. It comes from the fact that people are at sort of the end of a production process willing
Okay, I'm
to
going to have to
sacrifice
interrupt you
something to
now, Art. I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
going to
sure.
have to interrupt you, and we're going to have to come back right after the break, folks, and continue this conversation on the miracle of prices and choices. Please stay with us.